Hi guys, Jo here with another card making tutorial from Time for Tea Designs. Today's card, I will be creating my scene using just Copic markers. So this is essentially a one layer card with all of the detail being coloured using my markers. Now that might seem quite daunting, which is why I will spend quite a little bit of time on the colouring itself, just so that you can see how you can build up that scene, just starting with these 3 images from the Gardening Emily and Ernie set. In this Digi stamp set you will receive the 3 images, the little girl image Emily with her watering can, the little flower that she's watering, and you'll also get the image of Ernie sat in his watering can. In the set you will also get a PNG and a JPEG version of each of the images, and what this will allow you to do is to layer them up into a scene similar to this one in your Word package or any of your other software that you might be familiar with using. This then means that you can print them out as a whole image without having to do any masking or cutting out of your images. So you probably noticed the cat did a little photo bomb for me there and interrupted the filming. Bless her. She's very interested when I'm doing my crafting. She loves to get involved. And she does pop up in a couple of places on this particular video. So sorry about that. So while I've been explaining how you can create the scene with your Digi stamps, I've already started colouring up my image, and as you'll have seen, I have coloured the skin and I've now moved on to the hair. I use the same process when I'm colouring my skin in all of the videos that you'll have seen. So if you're familiar with my videos, you'll be familiar with the process where I saturate my paper using my lighter marker, and then I'll move through each of the darker shades to create some dimension. I tend to bring in the darker shades from the sides of the face and leave the paler space in the middle of her face. Again, that creates that nice rounded dimension to her face. I've done a similar thing with the hair, where I've saturated the paper with the lightest of my markers, and then where the hair bobble is, where there is shade behind each layer of hair, I've just added some of the darker shades, and I've also done that where her hair is parted, and I've left the lightest shade across the middle, so that creates the illusion of a rounded head. With the clothes, again, a very similar process where I've gone through my lighter shades and moved through my darker shades where I feel that parts of her body would be creating shadow. And again, another video bomb from Rosie there. I don't think she'll bother us again in the rest of the video, hopefully. So the watering can, again, is a very similar sort of process where I've started with my lightest shade, and then to create the illusion of curve, I just gave a little bit of a darker shade just at the very edges. And there you can see I'm using my Jelly Roll pen to highlight each of those curved areas with just a line and a few dots. And I really do think that that really helps add some dimension to those areas. Moving on now to the watering can with little Ernie in there, giving the base layer of my lightest shade, the R22. And I really love this combination of R22, R24 and R27. It's become a bit of a favourite of mine. It's a really nice salmony pink to red colour, and I just think it looks really great. So I'm just applying my darkest shades to the left hand side of the wheelbarrow. Any part of the wheelbarrow that is in the background is darker, and anything that is on the left hand side, which is where I imagine my shade will be, is in the darker shades. And the same goes for the inside of the wheelbarrow. Anything at the bottom will be slightly darker, as that would be more shaded. Anything closer to the top would be lighter. So it's just thinking about where your light's coming from, where your light source is, and what parts of your image are likely to be in the foreground, as they will be lighter than anything that's in the background. So now I've completed the wheelbarrow. I wanted to give that chance to dry a little bit before I coloured in Ernie, my little dog. So I'm moving on to my flower image, and I've just started with a base coat of yellow with the intention of making this an orange flower. But you'll see as I go along, I'm not really happy with how that looks in relation to the rest of the colours that I've used in the image there. And I'm thinking as well about the papers that I might use in my background. So I've left that to dry a little bit, as it is a very small image and I didn't want to oversaturate my paper. And I've moved on to Ernie here. Now Ernie, I've coloured with some spots of brown, so that I don't have to colour the full image, but also because those light areas just mean that he pops out of the wheelbarrow that little bit more. I didn't want him to appear too dark. So now I've moved back to my flower and I'm adding some red shades to that just to give it a warmer glow and to bring in some of the red that's within the wheelbarrow. And I'm now just colouring in the greens there just to start a little bit of my grassy foreground. Finishing touches are a little bit of jelly roll. Now that's dried, and just adding some highlights on each of those points. So now to create my grass foreground, and I'm just using my Copic multiliner to add some flicks and random lines that represent blades of grass. Not really thinking about it, just doing it very sketchily in some really random points. The great thing about this pen is that it is suitable to use with your Copic markers, as it works really well with those. So I'm now going in then with my YG11 to apply my base colour of green, and this is a really nice bright fresh colour green, and I'm just using a flicking motion to again simulate the look of blades of grass, and I'm just doing that really quickly, really randomly, not really again putting much thought into it. The reason that I really like Copic markers as opposed to a lot of other alcohol markers that I've tried is this soft brush nib. It's really great for doing this type of technique and for doing a really subtle, soft flicking motion. So again, it's great for doing things like hair or trying to achieve a look on animal fur. Some of the alcohol markers that I've used that have got more of a bullet nib tip, I really struggle to get this effect with those, as the nib is just that little bit too hard and it creates more of a line rather than a brush stroke, which the Copic markers do. So if you've had any problems trying to achieve this look or blend with other types of pen, then I would really recommend trying the Copic markers, as it is very, very different in practice. So I've just taken the next of my markers, the YG13, and I'm using that to create a little bit of shadow in my background, but also using this to add further flicks and darken those blades of grass, not across all of the ground, just in little parts where I feel that it would be that little bit darker. And again, going over with my darkest of those shades just to reinforce that colour and that shading. So where the little girl is kneeling down, I've added some around her knees. I've also flicked some of those darker colours up over her clothing, as that would be where she would be nestled into the grass, and that would appear over her clothing. And I've also done darker shades behind the wheels of the wheelbarrow, behind the wheelbarrow itself, and underneath the flower. So now I've moved on to colouring my sky, and the way that I like to do this with my Copic markers is I like to just do some little squiggles and flicks working their way out from behind my image. So I've started with the where the ground would meet the sky and just done some light squiggles around the base there, around the dog and wheelbarrow, and then all around the little girl image, and just worked those out as like little tendrils of clouds coming out from behind her head. Then to add some further detail, I've used the wonderful wave stencil from Time for Tea Designs and used the cloud that's within that stencil to just mark the outline using my marker. This is a great way of using your stencils in another way, and I've just done the very same light, very light twirly motion. That's the only way I can think to describe it. It's a little bit scribbly, a little bit twirly, and it just works its way out in little tendrils coming out from my image. And I've applied a slightly darker shade of the BG01 over that just to intensify the colour ever so slightly, but I don't want anything too dark or anything too in your face. I'm just looking to create a really pretty light, almost watercolor effect with my Copics in the background here, and to help blend all of that together and it not become too bright blue, I've used my blender pen just to smooth that out ever so slightly in various points. It's important to use a really light stroke and build this up really gradually. Where it appears darker on screen, that's where the paper has been saturated, and as it dries it really fades back out to create this really pretty look. Like I say, the end result is almost a watercolor effect because of the way that you've applied your brush strokes. So not in a solid way in the way that we've done her clothing, but that little twirly motion has given a really nice effect of clouds. The finishing touch is just to apply a bit of glossy accents to Ernie's nose, which I really like to do for animals. I just think that little wet nose look looks really cute. So now we're moving on to creating the rest of the card, which comes together quite quickly now, you'll be pleased to know. After all that colouring, the rest of the card is really quite simple. So I'm using my heavy doodle dies just to cut out one of the base panels for my card and for my image to sit on. And I'm using some contrasting patterned paper just to add another little bit of interest to the bottom of my card base. So just popping that through my die cutting machine again so that I can get the same stitched effect right the way through the back panel there. And then I'm just going to use my trimmer to cut that piece down to the right size. So I'm using my image to work out where I want the bottom portion to be, how big I'd like that to be, and then I'm going to line that up onto the top portion and use that just so that I can line that up on my trimmer before I cut that out. And now I've got that piece together, it's just a matter of adhering those. So I'm going to use some of my Cosmic Shimmer liquid glue, which is my favourite glue to use for this type of things. It just gives me that little bit of wiggle room. It dries clear, and it's a really strong bond that you get with that, so you know that your card or anything that you apply to your project isn't going to move around anywhere. So I'm attaching the full panel now to a side folding landscape A2 card blank, and just making sure that that's fully stuck down before I again use the same glue to attach the image that I've coloured. So this image is going to be the focal point of our card, so it doesn't really need much more embellishment other than a sentiment, I think. So I've pulled out the stamp set from the Time for Tea Designs Eurostar stamp set, and I'm just using a piece of coordinating paper from the paper pad that I've used and the sentiment Happy Birthday from that set. And I'm going to use some white embossing powder to create my sentiment. So I'm using some Versamark ink to stamp my sentiment onto that piece of paper there, and I'm just doing that twice, making sure that I get a really clear impression. And then I'm just going to apply my white embossing powder straight on top of that. Give it a little flick to make sure there are no little marks left on there, and then using my heat tool to set that in place. I then take one of the dies from the Time for Tea Designs Best Fishes banner and border die set, and this is the banner die, and this is a really versatile little sentiment die. It works perfectly with all of our sentiments, and it's the perfect size for the front of your cards. It is a little bit longer than my sentiment here, so I'm going to just place that in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to let the end hang off, and I'll trim that off shortly. But I've also cut another piece in a contrasting colour that ties in with the colours that are within the card, just to layer that behind the sentiment, and this will just help it stand out that little bit more, creates a little bit of a flag type effect. So now I'm going to trim down my little banner by lining that up onto the front of my card, flipping that over and then snipping off the end so that it's exactly the length that I need. And then I'm going to use some foam squares on the back of that just to raise that up and give that a little bit of dimension. And that is the card completed. The rest of the card is just one layer made up of all our lovely Copic colouring and those sweet little images of Emily and her little dog. So I really hope that you liked the video today. If you did, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in some more videos coming up really soon. Thank you. Bye bye.